travel. And I'm joined in studio by Kenny Deery on behalf of the Western Alliance. I'll get details of that in a moment. And Eoghan Corry joins me on the line as well. Eoghan, good morning to you.
Good morning, Keith.
Thanks for joining us today. Kenny, you're here because we had spoken to Shannon Airport yesterday. They nominated you, so they did, in relation to the alliance. What is this alliance we're talking about?
It's alliance of the business community, Keith, that have come together to try and effect greater change and greater influence on government policy around supporting our regional airports. And if we look from a Galway point of view, we have Shannon Airport just down the road with 27 routes operating out of it, and indeed we have Ireland West Airport up the road with 18 routes operating out of it. And what we want to see is the sustainable continuation and support of those airports. And we also are looking for government policy to change. If we look at Shannon at the moment, the ease of flow through the airport, the fantastic facility that it is, and the routes that we have. If you're going to the US at the moment, I see absolutely no reason why anybody should be looking at Dublin. They should be looking at Shannon. They should be looking at the routes into New York, through JFK, Newark, and indeed Boston. And what we want is to illustrate and keep reinforcing in government's minds the importance of these airports to the business community and to investment in the west of Ireland. But also, as we're seeing what's happening with Dublin at the moment, it makes imminent sense that people in the west of Ireland, or indeed right into the Midlands, when they're looking at travelling out of this country, they need to look at airports like Shannon.
But do you not think they're doing that now?
I think people are beginning to think, but their automatic reaction, and indeed, or automatic, even if you search on your phone and you start looking at Google Flights, the first thing that automatically comes up is Dublin.
Because you want to go direct, and maybe they go direct. Maybe there's more direct from, like there's Newark, JFK and Boston out of Shannon. Now there's more to come. Mm-hmm. Chicago and elsewhere, but that'll take time.
That'll take time, but to be honest, I'm looking at travelling to the States 3 times over the next 2 and a bit months, and I'm going out of Shannon each time, and I love the service in particular. Aer Lingus do a fantastic service, but I love United into that sea terminal in Newark, and with ease of transfer you can grab a bit of food and you're on a hop connect to wherever it is in the US that you want to go. It's a hub airport, so I see no reason. Imagine the convenience of that. You go down to Shannon, you go through security, you now have the new baggage systems so that you've got such a seamless experience. I was through it 2 weeks ago and I tweeted about it, and actually there's about 115,000 impressions on my tweet. The response was phenomenal. Talking to the ease of experience going through, you've got pre-clearance there. It's seamless. You're not queuing in these mad queues. The staff are so courteous. It's a real west of Ireland kind of cultural experience as opposed to anything else. You arrive in Newark into that sea terminal with the United service, and you've got such ease of transfer through it. It's a wonderful terminal, and you can connect to anywhere in the US. And compare that to going to Dublin, getting the bus up 2 3/4 hours. You queue to go through the security phenomenon, depending on how long or short the queues are, and there's been mixed experiences on it. You then go downstairs to the international gates and you're queuing again for another hour and a half, because you've got such a multitude of flights that you're caught up in. So I really would be a huge advocate for anyone listening to this, looking stateside, think Shannon first.
Eoghan, you've said that as well as a travel writer. You've said that to us many times on this programme.
Absolutely. The real issue is that Shannon is a seasonal airport. It's an airport with the population on one side. There isn't the population on the Limerick-Galway side. But that it matters less than it would have done 20 years ago when Western Alliance was first whipped up, and the same arguments that were being made around 2001, 2, 3, 4, and the boom of travel that came out of the recession of 7/11, of 9/11. What we've seen in Europe is this thing where secondary airports that don't have a huge back population to them, have become more important because they tend to be easier. Getting through them is easier. People have more or less abandoned in mass the idea that everybody would go to 4 or 5 major airports in Europe, Heathrow, Paris, Frankfurt, go through massive queues and get off and go through 4 or 5 airports in America, Newark, Chicago, JFK, Atlanta. They like going point to point when they get it. The problem side of that is that the number of options that you can daily flights, all of that comes down. It's not the biggest drawback in the world, but when airlines start making the big decisions, what they look for is an airport which doesn't have the sort of peak that Shannon has. It's a 10-week peak when all the passengers, the transatlantic side of it, go through. They look for airports that don't have a 70-30 or an 80-20 balance of the flights. Most of the people originating from one side, they try and get it as close to 50-50 as possible. That means that when when it comes to the number of options that Shannon has for their flights, it's come down a fair bit. You won't see a regional American airport ever flying to Shannon, which is a regional European airport. But there is certainly loads of potential to get not just the big ones, which they have, New York and Boston. They've had Chicago in the past, but also the ones that they've picked up, like Toronto, Philadelphia. There's lots more of those on the other side. It would be nice to see a good scattering of different destinations coming into Shannon, and that's the most viable option for them. The second one, and it's been explored in the past, is you turn Shannon into a hub, but Dublin is filling that role. Manchester is filling that role. And that big debate when I go long way back, some listeners would remember the big debate of the 90s, do we allow direct transatlantic flights into Dublin? The political answer, and Jackie Daly from Clare would have been really all over this debate at the time, was no, we try and concentrate our energy on Shannon and turn it into a hub and get the flights to Germany and France and Britain, to regional airports in Britain, into Shannon. It didn't happen. It didn't happen for a load of reasons, because maybe deregulation wasn't in place, but it didn't happen because it didn't win the confidence of the airlines. And we ended up with Manchester getting all the growth that Shannon was, that Dublin or Ireland was going to get. And that's been redressed a little bit in recent times. They're the problems. There are big things that Shannon could do, and nobody is talking about cutting back Shannon and rabbits running on the runways, like I think James Dillon said many years ago. The future for a regional airport is being shown by what's happened in Europe. Point-to-point aviation is what people love. They love getting through security quickly. They love not having to park 4 kilometres away from the terminal. All of those things. And there is a limit on how much Shannon can work in that, but certainly there's a huge future. It's not going to end up like Prestwick in Scotland did, where the tide went out very, very quickly on them.
Okay, Kenny, how would you respond to that? And then I want to get on then to the Ryanair situation, the cabin crew strike there as well. How would you respond to that?
I think Eoghan is right in much of what he says, but an interesting piece of research was done by our colleagues in Limerick Chamber as part of the Group Alliance a couple of years ago. It was called the Copenhagen Report, and it focused on what is happening across Europe and countries that have got this right. And Eoghan referred rightly there to Dublin being a hub and Manchester being a hub. And we can see what's happened as a result of that. They are now under huge pressure. I came out through Manchester a couple of weeks ago, and it was hugely pressurised situation. They're not able to deal with the capacity that they have. What's happened across Europe, and if we look at Austria, for example, government policy said, do you know what? If we create one monstrous airport, we're just going to turn out balanced regional development. We're going to turn that on its head. What we want to do is encourage airlines who do, like they're commercial animals, they will fall to the best load capacity and the best price that they can get for flights.
On seats, yeah.
Absolutely. So if it's a case that government policy can be directed in such a way to subsidise airlines to move into the regional airports, then what you're actually doing with a very simple approach, without building new roads and new motorways, is you're helping enable proper balanced regional development. You're redistributing flights back into the regions. You're redirecting some from Dublin, which at the moment is at a critical mass whereby they're not able to deal with what they have. And then you have thousands of people trying to navigate their way through the public transport systems to get back out into the regions. So what Copenhagen Report called for and what we're calling for within the Chambers Alliance in the Midwest is actually policy. And Eamon Ryan and Hildegard Naughton have been presented on this quite a bit, and they're fully au fait with it. But we're actually looking for government support at this stage to help effectively redirect some routes, support those route redirections, and actually begin to build a narrative that the government is serious about balanced regional development and about moving the aviation policy in a direction that really drives that. And that really will get us to what Eoghan talks about in terms of supporting the likes of Shannon to grow and flourish into the future, but also to help drive a narrative that government talk about, but we're not seeing the huge evidence that we need around balanced regional development.
The situation in relation to what's going on currently, by the way, Ryanair and those strikes, is that having a knock-on effect to the problems in Dublin as well?
Yeah, Dublin's had a good weekend. It's had a good report on the month that most of the passengers went through in 45 minutes. And the last major meltdown was that meltdown at the end of May, the last Sunday of May, when people missed their flights. And the numbers game on the security side has been growing, 30 people extra a week arriving in the security team. They now have more than 700. They'll be back over their pre-COVID level very soon. And they're vulnerable to a big COVID outbreak. In Omicron, 25% of security staff were sick at one stage, but it is working. The flight delays where the focus shifted, there's none of them today. We had 4 yesterday, 300 takeoffs, 300 landings. The flight cancellations. The flight cancellation situation seems to be back under control. There will always be flight cancellations. It's just when the numbers get too high, it becomes a big problem for passengers, obviously on it, but also airlines trying to reschedule passengers on the same day. The strikes, the history of this strikes is that the announcement of the strike gets a lot more publicity than the actual strike itself.
Okay.
The maximum that the cabin, there are 3 cabin crews involved in the Ryanair Spanish operation. One of them is the largest, the Comisiones Obreras. Ryanair signed a deal with them in May, and that caused the other 2 to announce a series of strikes, 12 days of strikes initially. It looked like they're going to extend that out. You get the maximum impact of those strikes because they're not the biggest union, was they managed to halt 10 Ryanair flights on Friday, and that's out of 350 Ryanair flights in Spain that day. So it's not really impacting. It has made a small impact, but because it's a smaller union and there are other political issues over protected flights that they were protesting against, that the Spanish government. So what we see is an announcement of a strike causing huge, much more anxiety than the actual strike has done. The strike that is worrying Ryanair is not their cabin crew, and there are different cabin crews. As I say, there are 38 countries. They've signed deals with about 62 unions, but there's about 40 other unions threatening strikes and different agitations. But the real strike that's causing them worry is the air traffic controllers of Marseille, and if they go on strike, that can actually cause... What happens there is the French air traffic control asks airlines to cancel a percentage of their flights. That's the one that could disrupt our summer going forward. But you know what? We've come a long way from where we were 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago. It does look like people are getting through the airport, and the huge stress that it's causing to people some of them going through their first holiday for 3 years isn't warranted anymore. I think that if your flight is cancelled, it could be cancelled. It could be cancelled at short notice, as 25% of the flights were last week. But it's the airline's problem. It's not yours. It's their job to get you to where you're supposed to go.
Okay, there's 2 quick calls in. I'll leave both your mics open there. First off is, can you get on to give a practical advice for those flying in the coming weeks? I'm flying to the United States and it's a lunchtime flight. What should I do?
Be there in time. Be there within the directed time from Dublin Airport. 2.5 hours for a short-haul flight, 3.5 hours for a long-haul flight. Dublin Airport confused things a little bit by saying an extra hour for baggage. Allow that, depending. Some of the baggage queues have been long. They're airline queues rather than airport ones. Remember, with your direct flight to North America from both Shannon and Dublin, that there is an extra security check, and then there's an extra immigration check, and some of those queues have also run. So I think you'll use all of your 3.5 hours, maybe you leave a little bit extra, because when the pressure comes on Dublin Airport security and you get through, it's not over. You're actually getting through another security check, and then the pre-clearance, which is a great invention, and Shannon had it long before Dublin. So the flight cancellations haven't really affected North America. We lost a rotation from Shannon to Boston, but the Aer Lingus policy will be to protect the transatlantic flights should they come under staff and crew pressure.
Keith, I'd say to that, let that look at an option to fly out of Shannon, and they won't have all that multiplicity of queues. They'll enjoy a nice bit of breakfast and a coffee and have a far more seamless experience.
If they've booked, where do they stand? Yeah. Keith, could you ask those gentlemen that you're talking to why there are no flights to Germany from Shannon? Thank you. Again, it's bums on seats, Kenny Deery.
It's bums on seats, and I know that the Mary Constantine and the team in Shannon have put a significant effort into looking at routes into Germany, I think in particular Frankfurt, and I think those discussions are still ongoing. Okay. And again, it's about justifying how we can support at a government level those airlines coming into the West. It all comes back to the commercial pie.
And dear Keith, we would love to fly from Shannon, but we go to Gran Canaria twice a year, and unfortunately no airline out of Shannon or Knock fly there. We have to make this tedious journey to Dublin every time. I thought there was a Grand Canary out of one of them. We'll figure that out.
I think there is. And also remember you've the option as well, and I know some people frown at this, but I would much prefer Hop and connect through Stansted, and then you'll get to again use it as a hub, and you can get seamlessly from the west to there.
Yeah. I know I spoke to somebody, both of you indeed. I still have Eoghan Corry on the line there with us. I spoke to somebody who was flying to San Francisco yesterday, but they went from Dublin to Amsterdam to San Francisco.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So they went over to go back.
Yeah.
Have you come across that, Eoghan, or have you done something like that?
Oh, quite a bit. It tends to happen with prices. You're very welcome to this crazy industry called aviation, where KLM will sell a cheaper flight from Ireland to San Francisco than they will from Amsterdam to San Francisco. The pricing system that the airlines use is they tend not to drop their lowest prices into their own market. They tend to drop it into a competitor's market, and they're competing for that San Francisco with the direct flight that Aer Lingus have from Dublin to San Francisco, which is very expensive because it's direct. People pay for the convenience, and all the other American airlines running hubs through JFK and Toronto, and the Canadian Air Canada, and Atlanta and Newark. So what we've seen in the past, and it happens with British Airways as well, is a lot of people flying east to fly west, not because of convenience, because it's more inconvenient, but because of price. I've seen people go all the way to Istanbul to come down through South American routes, which doesn't make sense. But that's the way pricing works. If you don't have children, if you're people of a certain age, younger people would be much better fitted out for the scramble through airports. And Amsterdam, of all the connecting airports in Europe, is the easiest by far, but it's also the one that's run into the most COVID problems. Several days this month, the Amsterdam airport has put out the call to airlines to cancel a percentage of their flights because they like Dublin, they just can't handle the crowds through the terminal. And the argument for Shannon, getting through Shannon seamless in that pleasant environment is never more clear than when you're stuck in a queue in one of the big crowded airports like Heathrow or Amsterdam.
All right, Eoghan Corry, thank you for joining us. The Alliance will keep going, Kenny Deery, on this?
Absolutely. I think the critical thing is once we're working together, and we've got an ear in government at this stage, and to be fair, government policy has been supportive. There has been capital investments in both our regional airports, and what we need is continuing supports and focus to drive this agenda so the policy will change, and we do get those more routes into the west of Ireland, and people can have a far more seamless experience. And from the business community, it's a real nod that the government is hugely supportive of investment in the west.
I would think that they'll all be looking to Shannon and Ireland West Airport Knock following our conversation today. Thank you for joining us today on the programme. Kenny Deery, thank you for joining us, and Eoghan Corry, thank you for joining us.
Galway Talks, in association with Tato Park, Ireland's #1 tourist and attractions destination.